In the cramped kitchen of a prestigious university, a black woman quietly wipes down each dining table. No one knows her name. No one even bothers to look. But when a team of the school's top professors is waging a battle of wits over an intractable equation, she pauses, listening intently. She offers a gentle suggestion, but is met with mocking, contemptuous laughter. "You're just the cafeteria staff. Know your place." What they don't realize is that this woman was once MIT's most celebrated mathematics prodigy. And with just 5 lines of formula on that whiteboard, she's about to shake this storied institution to its core. Hannah is 36, though the youthful glow of her face and the depth in her eyes give nothing away about the life she's led. Her plain white apron and cafeteria uniform render her invisible to the ambitiously wealthy students and world-renowned professors who fill these halls. This is Beacon University, one of America's most elite Ivy League schools. Every day, its corridors echo with the hurried footsteps of driven scholars and the self-assured gazes of leading academics. Amidst all this heady intellect and scholarly clamor, Hannah might as well not exist. She's accustomed to silently collecting trays, washing towering stacks of dishes, and serving coffee to people who will never learn her name. That morning was no different. The clock had just struck 7:14. The low hum of student whispers blended with the clatter of silverware against plates, all mingling with the rich scent of coffee and sizzling scrambled eggs. Hannah briskly wiped droplets of water from a silver tray, the steam rising lightly from the dishwasher blurring her features even more. Just as she was about to carry coffee to the usual table occupied by a group of math professors, a commanding, exasperated voice cut through the kitchen's bustle. "No way. I've tried everything, and it still stalls at the 3rd cycle, even with the logarithmic correction." It was Professor Andrew Harris, Beacon's famously exacting and arrogant math chair. His deep, resonant tone drew every nearby table's attention. Hannah froze, tilting her head to catch every word. Her heart suddenly pounded. A tremor ran through her hand, causing the coffee in her cup to ripple. Professor Lauren Morales, the only woman in the group, replied with her trademark sharpness. "The issue lies in the foundational structure, not the technique. I double-checked the math last night." A younger professor named David Kim sighed, disappointment clouding his eyes as he stared at pages dense with formulas. Without thinking, Hannah slowed her steps, her ears straining so she wouldn't miss a single term in their heated discussion. Familiar mathematical jargon, problems of rare complexity only true enthusiasts would understand, stirred memories she had buried more than a decade ago. "Your matrix is singular. Why not try inverting the vector in r to the power of 4? The words leapt from Hannah's lips before she could stop them. The table of professors fell silent. Andrew Harris turned, his gaze icy as he stared at her. "What did you say?" 4 pairs of incredulous eyes locked onto her with mocking disbelief. Ashamed, Hannah quickly lowered her head and murmured, "I'm sorry. I thought of it myself." Harris let out a cold, sardonic laugh. "Oh, so we have a new linear algebra expert in the kitchen, solving equations between wiping tables." They all laughed. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut into Hannah's fragile pride like a knife. Blushing, she wished she could vanish right then. Curious glances from other tables turned toward her, making her cheeks burn hotter. She fled back toward the kitchen, forcing her legs not to betray her. Hannah set the cup down, her palms slick with sweat, her heart twisting as though struck by a brutal blow to a self-worth long buried. In a far corner of the kitchen, she sank onto a chair, her eyes staring blankly at nothing. The professor's jeers echoed in her mind, intertwining with distant memories. the thunderous applause she once received at MIT for a solution no one had ever conceived. Hannah closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She was no longer the math wunderkind Hannah Mitchell had once been. Now she was invisible in a world of prestige, a woman who deserved nothing but scorn and dismissal from the scholarly realm. Yet somewhere deep within her, a small spark ignited. Memories of her passion for mathematics and the time she proved her brilliance reminded her she couldn't stay hidden forever. She refused to endure others' contempt endlessly. Slowly, she opened her eyes, now shining with resolve. Hannah knew she had lived in the shadows far too long. It was time to change that, not just to reclaim her own worth, but to demand the respect she'd earned and could still command. Hannah quietly returned to her usual spot in the kitchen, her heart still trembling from the earlier taunts. The oppressive, stifling heat of the space seemed to squeeze even tighter the storm of emotions churning inside her. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt as heavy as her own sorrow. From the professor's table, Professor Andrew Harris, Beacon's most renowned faculty member, once hailed as the university's genius, continued speaking as if nothing had happened. He stood tall, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, dressed in a crisp navy blazer that reinforced his air of authority and confidence. He was the sort of figure who commanded both respect and fear from students, and even his fellow professors tread carefully around him. "Honestly," Andrew boomed, deliberately directing his gaze toward the kitchen, his tone dripping with challenge, "we all know this problem has never been solved. And of course, there's no way a cafeteria worker like that girl could understand it." His cruel words set off another round of laughter at the table. Lauren Morales, the only woman among them, offered an awkward, uncomfortable smile. Deep down, she found Andrew's arrogance distasteful, but she didn't dare speak up for someone like Hannah. Behind her, David Kim, a junior professor in his early 30s, shifted uneasily, clearly put off by Andrew's dismissiveness. Yet he, too, stayed silent. No one in that group dared challenge Andrew Harris, the most influential voice in Beacon's math department. Hannah stood in the kitchen's shadows, every mocking word cutting into her. She bit her lower lip, her hands clenching the soaked dish towel as if it were the last piece of herself she could hold on to. In that moment, her glorious past surged back before her eyes. Once the youngest prodigy at MIT, celebrated by the greatest minds in mathematics as America's youngest math genius. And now, here she was, completely invisible in this small back room, ridiculed just for letting a sliver of her knowledge slip out. She remembered those passionate lectures, the thunderous applause that followed her lightning-fast solutions to impossible problems. Hannah had believed mathematics was her life, her very breath. But life, she learned, could be cruel and unpredictable. Driven by her mother's cruel Alzheimer's diagnosis, she'd abandoned everything, slipping into this silent obscurity. Those memories stung even more. She knew she didn't deserve scorn, yet she couldn't bring herself to speak the truth. Who would believe a young black woman in a kitchen uniform standing before some of the university's most powerful minds? At the professor's table, Andrew Harris carried on, his voice resonant with self-satisfaction. "I think we should press on with our research. There's no point wasting time on nonsense from someone with no real expertise." Hannah trembled. Never before in her years here had she felt such a sharp sting. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she swiftly wiped it away. She wasn't crying because of Andrew's mockery. She wept because she'd let herself stay in this shadow too long, granting others permission to look down on her. Finally, Professor Morales couldn't hold back any longer. In a softer, conciliatory tone, she said, Perhaps we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss any idea, Andrew. You never know. An outside perspective might be just what we need. Andrew raised an eyebrow, smirking. Lauren, you really think a cafeteria server knows anything about r to the fourth vectors and singular matrices? We have more than enough brilliant professors and grad students here. Clearly, she's not one of them. Lauren lowered her eyes, silent. She knew better than to argue with Andrew, who'd never admit he was wrong or listen to anyone else. His words felled Hannah like a blow. She ducked her head and hurried deeper into the kitchen, desperate to escape the curious, pitying stares. Though her heart had been broken long ago, this cut deeper than ever. She sank onto a small stool beside a worn wooden table piled high with dirty dishes. Covering her face with her hands, she fought to steady her breathing so no one would know she was crying. Tear after tear fell, each one carrying the weight of humiliation, pain, and self-doubt. Then, amid the chaos of her hurt, a fierce resolve flared to life. Hannah knew she could no longer remain hidden. She would not allow people like Andrew Harris to continue belittling her. It was time to show them how wrong they were. Slowly, she lowered her hands, lifting her reddened yet determined eyes. She understood that the path ahead would not be easy, but this time she would not give up. Hannah Mitchell would rise, face them all, armed with the very brilliance she'd been forced to conceal for so many years. As dusk settled over Boston, the pale golden rays of the setting sun brushed gently against the small window of Hannah's apartment, as if trying to soothe her wounded soul. She sat quietly at the worn wooden table by the window, her eyes still swollen from the tears of shame she'd shed in the university kitchen this morning. Carefully, she opened a drawer and retrieved an old notebook, its pages yellowed with age. The cover still bore those once proud letters. Faded now, but still legible. MIT, Department of Mathematics, Class of 2008. Hannah's heart pounded, as though simply touching the book would unleash memories both vivid and heartbreaking. The pages, filled with mathematical formulas, symbols, and hastily scrawled notes, transported her back to those glorious days, when she was hailed as the youngest math prodigy and MIT's wunderkind. She'd been full of confidence then, convinced no problem was beyond her grasp. She remembered her graduation ceremony as if it were yesterday, standing on the honor podium, her glossy black hair spilling over a crimson gown, her eyes shining with pride and emotion as thunderous applause echoed through the auditorium. Everyone was certain she would become one of her generation's greatest mathematicians, a renowned professor and leading researcher in no time. But life never follows a straight line, and the turning point came when she least expected it. Though it had been more than a decade ago, that day's memory remained as sharp as if it had happened yesterday. She had just returned from an international conference in Europe, buoyed by her triumphant presentation. Yet, the moment she stepped into her familiar apartment, her heart sank at the vacant look in her mother's eyes. Linda Mitchell, always so vibrant and full of life, sat silently on the sofa, her gaze distant and unfocused. "Mom, I'm home." Hannah rushed over and gently grasped her mother's shoulders. Linda looked up, her eyes blank, as though she did not recognize the daughter who had grown up in her arms. Who are you?" she asked, her voice weak and trembling. It felt as though someone had squeezed Hannah's heart. In an instant, the bright future she'd sketched for herself shattered. After a battery of tests, doctors confirmed Linda was in the early stages of Alzheimer's. From that moment on, Hannah knew her life would never be the same. She faced an agonizing crossroads: pursue her mathematical dreams or give everything up to care for the woman who had sacrificed so much for her. Friends urged her to hire help, reminding her of the brilliant career that lay ahead. Even her most respected mentor at MIT, Professor Edward Thompson, pleaded with her. "Hannah, talent like yours is rare. You don't have to give it all up. Find someone to care for your mother and continue your work. The world of mathematics needs you." But each time she looked into her mother's hazy, fragile eyes, Hannah's resolve crumbled. Linda Mitchell had been her everything, the tireless supporter who had encouraged her every step of the way. She could not abandon her now, no matter how bright her own future seemed. In the end, love won over ambition. Hannah declined a coveted PhD position and offers from prestigious research institutes, returning to Boston to care for her mother. 14 years passed. Every morning she woke, hoping her mother would look at her and remember her name, but it never happened. She watched as the woman she loved slipped deeper into oblivion until she no longer recognized herself. Since that day, Hannah buried her genius, taking on humble jobs, working in a small grocery store, cleaning, serving at the university cafeteria. To everyone she met, she was just an ordinary woman, unremarkable and unseen, but she accepted it all, unwilling to let anything distract her from caring for her mother. Yet today, after Andrew Harris and the other professors publicly mocked her, something long dormant in Hannah's pride awakened. Sitting beside that notebook of formulas, she realized she could not remain in the shadows any longer. Her past brilliance, once smoldering like an ember, flared into a roaring flame, urging her to prove herself. Hannah closed the notebook gently and gazed out at the sky, now deepening to twilight purple over Boston. She knew this decision would change her life once more, but this time she would not run away. No matter what, her talent could not vanish simply because she had chosen love over fame. It was time to face her past, to reclaim who she truly was. As the eastern sky brightened, Hannah rose from the little table by the window. She hadn't slept a wink all night. Her eyes still burned with resolve, reflected in the soft morning light like a vow that she would never look back. The long night had been an inner battle, past and present clashing, but at last Hannah knew what she had to do. Quietly, but with firm determination, she moved to the aging bookshelf in the corner and gently lifted her old math notebook. It was the one she hadn't dared open in 14 years, ever since leaving MIT to care for her mother. Dust coated its cover, but as her fingertips traced the faded letters, MIT, Department of Mathematics, Class of 2008, her heart pounded with the same youthful fervor she once felt. She returned to the table, set the notebook down, and inhaled deeply. In that moment, she faced her past self, proud, passionate, and scarred by loss. Slowly, she flipped through the yellowed pages, each formula a tiny spark awakening the memories she'd long suppressed. Every equation she saw was tied to those brilliant days at MIT, nights spent tackling problems that stumped even senior professors, burning the midnight oil to craft complex proofs, then standing at the lectern to thunderous applause from distinguished faculty. But those glorious days were erased by a single life-shattering event: her mother Linda Mitchell's Alzheimer's diagnosis. Hannah had traded everything to become her mother's caregiver, and never once regretted it. Yet now, this notebook stirred in her a powerful longing, the desire to live fully once more through her true gift. She flipped ahead to the last unfinished page, where a faint outline of an advanced matrix theory problem lay waiting. Years ago, she'd been on the verge of a breakthrough in vector spaces and singular matrices, until life intervened. Now, the problem sprang to vivid life in her mind, every detail as clear as if she'd never set pen aside. There was no more hesitation in her gaze, only fierce determination. She drew a deep breath, retrieved her blue fountain pen from the drawer, her hand trembling slightly, and touched pen to paper. Instantly, doubt vanished. In that moment, she was no longer the invisible woman in Beacon's kitchen, but the same mathematics prodigy she once was. Symbols streamed onto the page, growing sharper and more confident by the second. Vectors and matrices, transformations and theorems. Hannah reconstructed them all with elegant precision. Her thought process flowed with such clarity, she surprised even herself at how swiftly her latent talent awoke. Outside the window, dawn's golden light filtered through the thin glass, illuminating the small room and casting Hannah's face in a portrait of renewed purpose. But she paid no attention to the world outside. Her entire being was absorbed in mathematics, like an artist lost in a long-forgotten masterpiece. After more than an hour of absolute focus, Hannah finally set down her pen. There, before her on the aged page, stood a complete, graceful solution to the once insoluble problem. Beautiful in its simplicity, true to the spirit of mathematics itself. She exhaled, her heart racing as she gazed upon the symbols she'd just penned. Rubbing her eyes, she forced herself to believe the miracle she'd wrought, that after 14 years of silent sacrifice, she had returned to her truest calling. Pride and joy surged through her, yet beneath it lay a deep nervousness. Did she have the courage to face those who had ridiculed her, especially Professor Andrew Harris, whose scorn had cut so deeply? Hannah knew that to reclaim her worth, she must step out of the shadows and confront skeptical, prejudiced eyes. But she resolved that fear would no longer rule her. She would not slip back into that kitchen as an invisible woman. It was time for Hannah Mitchell to stand up and declare her true value. Softly closing the notebook, she stared long at the brightening sky outside. A gentle, determined smile curved her lips. Ahead lay countless challenges, but this time she would not back down. For in rediscovering her courage and her passion for mathematics, she had found the most important piece of herself once more. The first light of the day had just brushed the treetops outside when Hannah stepped out of her tiny apartment. The sky was still dim, and the crisp chill of an early October morning in Boston made her shiver. She gripped her old math notebook so tightly it felt as if any slack in her hold might let the rare courage she'd found slip away. She hurried toward Beacon University, her feet driven by a mysterious force stronger and more resolute than ever before. Each step reaffirmed her determination. This time, she would not let fear or doubt win. At dawn, the campus was strangely tranquil and beautiful. Gone were the rushing footsteps, the boisterous laughter, and the cold, contemptuous stares of others. In this moment, Hannah felt as if the entire university belonged to her, a silent stage awaiting her performance. The great doors of the math building stood quietly before her. She entered the long, empty hallway, heart pounding, but spirit unshaken. She paused at the door to Seminar Room 308, where advanced mathematical discussions were held, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The room was expansive, its whiteboard pristine, as if waiting for something extraordinary. Hannah's hand trembled as she picked up a black marker. A familiar thrill, equal parts nerves and excitement, ran down her spine when the tip touched the smooth surface. In that moment, the outside world disappeared. There was no scorn from Andrew Harris, no mocking glances from her colleagues, no nagging insecurities. There was only Hannah and the problem on the board, a problem so formidable that even Beacon's top professors had conceded defeat. She began to write, her strokes slender but assured. The equation unfolded perfectly, each line elegant and precise. Vector operations, matrix manipulations, logical transformations, proof steps, All flowed like a flawless mathematical symphony. No errant mark, no mistake. After about 20 minutes of intense focus, Hannah stepped back to admire her work. A beautiful, crystal-clear solution spanned the board. Pride surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of anxiety as she realized she stood alone in that room, vulnerable to anyone who might walk in. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Hannah's heart froze. She hastily capped the marker, returned it to its spot, and bolted for the door. The steps drew ever closer, each tick of the hallway clock stretching into eternity. She cracked the door open and peered into the corridor. Thankfully, it was empty. The footsteps had apparently veered elsewhere. She closed the door softly, heart hammering, and slipped out of the building. But just as she reached the main corridor, a familiar voice called from down the hall, stopping her in her tracks. "Is anyone in there?" It was Andrew Harris. He must have arrived early to prepare for the morning seminar. Hannah held her breath, flattened herself against the wall in the hallway corner, and tried not to let her pounding pulse betray her. She watched his silhouette approach, his brow furrowed in suspicion. Andrew paused, eyes scanning the empty hallway, then shrugged and entered room 308, the very room where Hannah had just left her greatest mark. Only when the door clicked shut did she dare move. She practically ran out of the building, breath coming in ragged gasps of exhilaration and fear. Once she burst into the open quad, she leaned against a large tree trunk and struggled to calm her breathing. By now, the sun had climbed higher, its warm golden rays filtering through the leaves and illuminating Hannah's pale face. She closed her eyes and let the sunlight wash over her, trying to dispel the tension of the morning. Deep inside, she knew what she'd done could change her life forever, and carried risks she'd never known. She could not predict how Andrew Harris or others would react when they discovered who had solved the problem. There might be doubt, even anger, but in that moment fear no longer held her. A strange sense of freedom and joy welled up inside, soothing her heart. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she had done the right thing. Hannah Mitchell was no longer invisible, and this was just the beginning of the challenging, pride-filled journey she was about to undertake. Just minutes after Hannah slipped out of the building, dawn's first light spread across the Beacon campus, dissipating the thin mist that had blanketed the walkways. Inside Seminar Room 308, Professor Andrew Harris entered, still wearing a look of skepticism. He swept his gaze over the familiar, empty space. Everything looked exactly as it always did, except for one startling anomaly that made him freeze in the center of the room. The whiteboard where his research group had written and erased formulas hundreds of times now bore a perfectly crafted solution. Crisp, precise, and elegant, as if lifted straight from a classic mathematics text. Andrew stood rooted to the spot, eyes wide with disbelief and suspicion at what lay before him. "No way," he muttered, stepping closer to inspect each line of the equations. The numbers and symbols were uncannily correct, and the logical progression was so airtight it defied refutation. This was the very solution his team had spent nearly a year chasing, but never found. A surge of anger and doubt replaced his initial astonishment. Someone had quietly solved the problem, outperforming even Beacon's top professors. Impossible. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed Professors Lauren Morales and David Kim. "Get to room 308 right now. Something serious just happened." Less than 10 minutes later, Lauren and David arrived, breathless from hurrying over. Both froze when they saw the streamlined equations on the board. "Who did this?" Lauren gasped, voice trembling with excitement. It's frighteningly perfect." David said nothing as he approached the board, his eyes scanning every symbol with growing awe. He understood the magnitude of this breakthrough, an achievement that any university in the world would kill to claim. But who at Beacon had the skill to produce it without anyone knowing? Andrew folded his arms, suspicion etched on his face. This didn't just appear out of thin air. Someone must have slipped in early this morning. We need to review the security footage immediately. An hour later, they gathered around the monitor in the security office. The fast-forwarded footage made Andrew and the others' hearts race with every passing second, until the image of a petite young woman stepping into the room appeared on screen. Lauren covered her mouth in shock. David furrowed his brow, and Andrew went pale. "Wait, that's Hannah Mitchell? The woman who works in our cafeteria?" David blurted, incredulous. Lauren's eyes brimmed with guilt as she remembered Andrew's earlier ridicule of Hannah. It was almost unbelievable that the invisible cafeteria worker had authored the elegant solution on their board. Andrew stood silent for a long moment, his face draining of color. His pride had taken a devastating blow. How could someone he had so casually dismissed outperform him and his entire research team? Word of the solution spread through Beacon University like wildfire. Whispers and speculation buzzed down every hallway, in the library, lecture halls, and campus cafes. Students and faculty alike clamored to learn the truth. No one believed that the author could be the young black woman they saw serving them coffee every day. When news reached President Robert Winston, he immediately summoned the involved professors to an emergency meeting. His stern gaze swept the room. "We need a clear explanation for this," he declared in his authoritative tone. "Who stands behind this solution?" Andrew swallowed hard, voice shaking as he answered, "Sir, it appears to be Hannah Mitchell, a cafeteria staff member." A stunned silence fell over the meeting. No one knew how to react. Finally, President Winston broke the tension. "If she truly solved this problem, we must invite her in to speak at once. This is a major event, a turning point for Beacon University." As the professors and the president continued their urgent discussion, Andrew felt as though 100 knives were twisting in his chest. His once unshakable pride lay in ruins, replaced by bitter anger. He could not accept that a cafeteria worker had so spectacularly outclassed him. Quietly slipping out of the meeting room, Andrew stood alone in the empty corridor, his eyes glinting with resentment. A dark thought surfaced. She did this to humiliate me in front of everyone. His wounded ego vowed that Hannah Mitchell would not be celebrated so easily. Meanwhile, Hannah carried on her usual duties in the cafeteria, unaware that she had just shaken Beacon University to its core, and that her life was about to change forever thanks to the courage she'd found after 14 years in the shadows. While all of Beacon University buzzed with curiosity over the unexpected solution, Andrew Harris sat alone in his small office, the faint glow of his computer screen illuminating his tense features. He opened his browser and, with fingers tapping furiously, searched for Hannah Mitchell, MIT, clinging to the hope of uncovering some clue to explain this mystery. The results popped up almost instantly. Andrew leaned forward, eyes widening in disbelief as he absorbed each line. His screen displayed a portrait of a vibrant young student, her confident smile lighting up the page. Hannah Mitchell, MIT's youngest mathematics prodigy, recipient of the Fields Medal for Outstanding Undergraduate Achievement, class of 2008. He stared at that ambitious face, speechless. Below her photo lay glowing articles celebrating the extraordinary achievements of this young African-American woman. Each glowing headline stabbed at Andrew's pride like a sharpened blade. "No way," he whispered, voice thick with shock and anger. How could someone like her, someone he'd mocked, end up as a cafeteria server, only to quietly return later and wound his professional reputation so deeply. Scrolling down, he found an old MIT magazine feature. Math prodigy Hannah Mitchell abruptly abandons career to care for mother with advanced Alzheimer's. His heart clenched as he read. A part of him felt ashamed at the tragedy she'd endured, but his wounded ego, the proud self he so carefully cultivated, burned hotter than ever. He refused to accept this truth. Discovering that the woman he'd publicly ridiculed was once the very genius he'd admired felt like a slap to the face. Gritting his teeth, Andrew's eyes ice over with bitterness. To him, pride was paramount, and Hannah Mitchell had committed the unforgivable sin of making him look foolish in front of all of Beacon. While Andrew wrestled with his wounded vanity, word of Hannah's true background spread like wildfire across campus. Students, faculty, and staff all buzzed with questions. Why had a celebrated math prodigy chosen to work in the cafeteria? Why had she abandoned her glory and lived in obscurity for more than a decade? All those curious stares suffocated Hannah. She had never wanted her past thrust into the spotlight. The next morning, when she stepped into the cafeteria, nothing felt the same. Pitying looks and hushed whispers from students and colleagues made her want to turn and flee. Her heart grew heavy, and her feet felt rooted to the floor whenever she met those probing gazes. As she cleared a table, averting her eyes, a young female student's curious voice cut through the silence. "Miss Mitchell, why are you working here? I heard you used to be a math genius." Hannah looked up, startled by the girl's astonished face. She managed only a shy nod before hurrying away. But then another professor, standing nearby, spoke in a skeptical tone. "Hannah, if you're really that brilliant, why have you hidden yourself all this time? Is there some special reason?" She froze, her breath catching. Each question felt like a pinprick to her pride and her deepest wounds. "I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about it," she replied, voice trembling but resolute. Still, the questions persisted, and the scrutiny grew more intense, creating an unbearable pressure that threatened to crush her. Meanwhile, in the president's office, Andrew Harris stood before President Robert Winston, his tone bitter and skeptical. "Sir, we can't jump to conclusions based on a single board solution. Hannah Mitchell gave up mathematics over a decade ago. How can we believe she suddenly returned to solve a problem that stumped our top professors?" President Winston regarded Andrew evenly, perceptive enough to detect the bitterness and bias in his voice. After a thoughtful pause, he replied, "Andrew, I understand how you feel, but we cannot deny the truth simply because it's uncomfortable. We need to investigate thoroughly and show respect for Hannah and her past contributions." Andrew pressed his lips together, wounded pride flaring again. He felt his honor and status threatened by Hannah's sudden reemergence. Back in the cafeteria, Hannah finished her shift and made to leave as quickly as possible. But as she stepped out the door, a figure blocked her path. Andrew Harris, his eyes cold and hostile. "I've looked into your past, Hannah. Don't think that solving that equation will make everyone forget the years you walked away. We'll be getting to the bottom of this." She stood silent, pain swirling in her chest as she met his gaze. She felt the full force of his animosity, but also realized something crucial. She could no longer run away. No matter how painful or daunting, it was time to face everything and defend the true worth she had once possessed, and still carried within her. The late afternoon sun cast its final glow over Boston as Hannah stood before the small conference room door on the second floor of the math building. She drew in a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart, though in reality it pounded faster than ever. After days of living under suspicious glances, hushed gossip, and mounting pressure, she knew it was time to confront the people beyond that door, those who had hurt her so deeply. She eased the door open. Inside, the room was deathly quiet, as if all of space itself were holding its breath for her arrival. Seated at the table were 3 familiar faces, none of them comforting just now. Professor Andrew Harris, whose eyes were cold and challenging. Professor Lauren Morales, her expression a mix of guilt and unease. And David Kim, the only one among them whose look carried genuine compassion. "Hello, everyone," Hannah said softly but clearly. "Hannah, please have a seat," Lauren offered, doing her best to ease the tension. Yet the uneasiness still hung heavy in the air. Hannah sat slowly in the chair opposite them. Andrew remained silent, his gaze unwavering, as though he were searching for any crack in her composure. "We need an explanation," Andrew said suddenly, his voice as sharp as a blade. "You were once a mathematics prodigy at MIT, then you vanished from academia for over a decade. Why, Hannah? Why live like an invisible person, then suddenly reappear and humiliate us?" Hannah met Andrew's furious eyes without flinching. His icy stare pained her, but this time she would not look away. She knew he was attacking her pride, but she no longer wished to hide. "Professor Harris," she began quietly, "I never intended to hurt or embarrass anyone. For 14 years, I didn't hide my talents to lay a trap or prove a point. I lived like this because I had no other choice." Lauren and David exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. Andrew said nothing, but his sharp gaze never left Hannah's face. She drew in another breath as tears blurred her vision and memories flooded back. "I didn't leave MIT because I wanted to give up mathematics. I left because of my mother, Linda Mitchell, who was diagnosed with severe Alzheimer's. She raised me alone, sacrificed everything so I could succeed at MIT. And when she needed me most, I couldn't abandon her." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "My professors at MIT told me not to sacrifice my career, that I could hire help for her. But I couldn't. I couldn't let the woman who loved and cared for me her entire life spend her final days without me by her side. To me, my mother's love mattered more than any glory or mathematical achievement." Silence fell. Lauren covered her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. David lowered his head, his face full of deep empathy. Even Andrew, who had remained cold, showed the faintest sign of wavering. "But why didn't you return after your mother passed away?" Andrew asked, his tone softer now. "Because," Hannah replied in a hushed voice, her eyes distant with pain, "my mother only passed away a few years ago. After all those years away from academia, I didn't think anyone would accept me back. I'd grown used to invisibility. I was afraid that if I tried to come back, people would only see my absence, not the talent I once had." Her voice caught, her shoulders trembling. Lauren quickly handed her a tissue, tears of emotion in her eyes. "Hannah, I'm truly sorry for misunderstanding and underestimating you. Your devotion and sacrifice are more admirable than any achievement," Lauren said, her voice choked with feeling. David added, sincere and moved, "I can't imagine what you've endured. But now that you're back, know that your solution wasn't just a mathematical feat. You've shown incredible perseverance and courage." Andrew was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the table as he fought the turmoil inside him. Finally, he looked up slowly, his voice gentler than it had ever been. "I owe you an apology, Hannah. I was wrong to judge you without knowing your story. I let my pride cloud my judgment. You didn't deserve any of that." Hannah met Andrew's eyes, her own softening. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not of pain, but of relief. She had finally faced the truth and freed herself from a burden she'd carried for over a decade. The room fell into a peaceful stillness, but this time there was no tension, only a newfound understanding among people who had once misjudged each other. And in that moment, Hannah knew she had truly stepped out of the shadows. She was no longer invisible. Though challenges still lay ahead, she was ready to face them all, not with fear or insecurity, but with pride, resilience, and the genuine value she had always carried within herself. The next morning, as dawn's first light gently touched the treetops of Beacon University's campus, Hannah stepped into the dining hall with her heart still fluttering from last night's confrontation. Unlike any other day, her stride felt steady and confident. Her shoulders no longer weighed down by the burdens she'd carried for so many years. Yet she could not have anticipated what awaited her. The moment the dining hall doors opened, Hannah sensed something different. The usual clamor of voices had fallen completely silent, and dozens of eyes turned toward her, filled with obvious respect and admiration. In that instant, she felt her feet lock to the floor, astonished by this surprising change. Students in line for breakfast looked back and greeted her with warm smiles, and even her cafeteria co-workers, who had once treated her as invisible, paused in their work to nod and welcome her as if she were the honored guest of the morning. This unexpected warmth made Hannah's heart swell. "Good morning, Hannah," called a gentle, familiar voice. Hannah turned to see Professor Lauren Morales approaching with a sincere smile, no hint of yesterday's awkwardness. "Good morning, Professor Morales," Hannah replied, feeling both moved and a bit shy. Lauren placed a reassuring hand on Hannah's shoulder, her eyes full of genuine understanding. "The school made a very important decision this morning," she said. "We all agreed you deserved to know first." Hannah held her breath, waiting for Lauren to continue. President Winston convened an emergency meeting with the university's leadership, and everyone agreed that Beacon needs to honor the value you've brought us. We've decided to establish a new scholarship fund in your name, the Hannah Mitchell Fellowship. It will support outstanding students who face hardships. Students like you once were, gifted, yet forced to sacrifice so much for family and circumstance. Lauren's words rang with pride and respect. Hannah stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes at the thought that the name she'd once hidden would now be celebrated so profoundly. Suddenly, applause erupted throughout the dining hall, first gentle, then swelling into a powerful wave of appreciation. Students and staff rose to their feet, clapping non-stop to express their deep admiration. In that moment, Hannah realized she was no longer invisible. At last, she was seen and valued, not only for her mathematical talent but for her true worth, her devotion, courage, and selflessness over all those years. Just then, Professor Andrew Harris entered the hall. He paused, eyes on Hannah. His face bore no trace of its usual chill. Instead, he looked gentle and slightly ashamed, as though he'd fully grasped his mistake. He stepped toward her, sincerity shining in his gaze. "Hannah, I sincerely hope you'll accept my deepest apology," he began. "I was wrong to underestimate you, and worse, to doubt your character and real value." Hannah regarded Andrew for a long moment. Then, she offered a gentle smile, her eyes free of bitterness. "Thank you, Professor Harris. I understand that everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that we face them and make them right." Andrew nodded, a rare, relieved smile touching his lips. In that instant, everyone in the dining hall felt that something profoundly important had been healed. It wasn't just recognition of talent, It was genuine understanding and respect among people who had once misjudged one another. That morning became one of the most memorable in Beacon's history. Students and staff flocked to congratulate Hannah, expressing admiration and gratitude for the powerful lesson she'd given them. The curious, doubtful gazes of yesterday were replaced by looks of genuine esteem and warmth, and Hannah felt the true kindness of her community. Before leaving the dining hall, Hannah took one last look around, imprinting this precious moment in her heart. She knew the Hannah Mitchell Fellowship would be more than an award. It would stand as a symbol of recognizing and honoring each person's deepest values, often overlooked, yet always deserving to be seen and respected. Stepping out into the sunlit quad, Hannah's steps felt lighter than ever. The bright sunlight bathed the campus in a hopeful glow, as if welcoming a new day of promise. For the first time in years, Hannah felt truly free. She was no longer invisible, because now the world had seen her, honored her, and, most of all, truly understood the value she had always carried within. Just days after that unforgettable morning, the entire Beacon University campus buzzed with the news that Hannah Mitchell would return to the podium, not to lecture on mathematics, but to share her story about the power of humility and the art of true listening. The announcement spread like wildfire, creating a wave of excitement and eager anticipation throughout the community. On the afternoon of her talk, Beacon's grand auditorium filled to capacity long before showtime. Students, faculty, staff, and even the university's most distinguished professors, Andrew Harris, Lauren Morales, and David Kim among them, gathered with a mix of excitement and curiosity. As Hannah appeared, stepping onto the stage in a simple blue dress, elegant, confident, yet unassuming, the hall erupted in heartfelt applause that lasted for a full minute before gradually dying down. When the room finally grew quiet, Hannah spoke slowly, her gentle voice carrying an irresistible strength that captured every ear in the room. "I never imagined I'd stand before you like this today. For so many years, I was used to being invisible. But perhaps it was precisely that experience that gave me the courage to speak now about the value of humility and the power of listening." Silence fell once more. Hannah continued, her eyes warm and earnest. "When I was young, I believed knowledge and talent were all we needed to prove our worth. I stood on the pinnacle of achievement at MIT, receiving applause, admiration, and accolades from people around the world. But when crisis struck, when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I realized that true human value doesn't lie in external admiration, but in the choices we make at our most challenging moments." Her voice wavered briefly, then grew firmer. "I chose to give up all that glory to care for my mother, not out of some grand nobility, but simply because I realized I couldn't live without filial devotion, humility, and love. I learned that sometimes silence and listening are what give our lives real meaning." In the audience, many wiped away tears as they heard Hannah speak of her mother. Even Andrew Harris, who had fought to maintain a neutral expression, bowed his head, visibly moved by her heartfelt words. Taking a step forward, Hannah looked each person in the eye. Humility is not weakness, and listening is not submission. They are true strengths, the ability to recognize the hidden value in every person we meet, no matter their status or appearance. I was once invisible because I feared that the world wouldn't accept my failures. But it was precisely those failures that taught me humility, and the power of listening are the greatest gifts one can possess. She paused, her voice rising with conviction. "I'm not here to tell you that I'm better than anyone else. I simply want to remind us all that each of us can be a genius in our own way. But the most important thing is that we learn to see, listen to, and honor the worth of others. Never underestimate anyone, no matter how small or ordinary they may seem, for often those we deem invisible are the very people who bring the world its greatest wonders. The auditorium burst into thunderous applause once again, the noise soaring as everyone absorbed her words. Hannah stood quietly, letting her message sink into every heart in the room. Then she turned toward Andrew Harris, her gaze open and forgiving. I too made mistakes by staying silent for so long, inadvertently causing misunderstanding and pain. But I believe that acknowledging our own mistakes is what truly helps us grow. And today, I want to thank those who helped me learn that lesson, including Professor Andrew Harris. Andrew looked surprised, eyes widening, then rose to his feet and gave a gentle bow, a silent, heartfelt apology. The hall broke into even louder cheers and applause, as though everyone sensed that forgiveness and understanding had mended old wounds. That speech ended in a wave of emotion unlike anything Beacon had ever seen. As Hannah stepped off the stage, students swarmed her with gratitude for her sincere, inspiring words. She smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but these were tears of genuine joy. Exiting the auditorium, Hannah looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling a gentle yet profound strength fill her soul. She knew her journey to rediscover herself had come to an end, and a new journey, spreading the true values of humility, courage, and listening, was only just beginning. And now Hannah Mitchell was completely ready to move forward, bringing these priceless gifts into the world around her. As the last rounds of applause drifted away in Beacon University's auditorium, Hannah stood still for a moment, allowing her gentle yet powerful gaze to meet each face before her. A hushed, reverent calm filled the room, as though everyone were quietly reflecting on the truths she'd just shared. She stepped forward, sincerity shining in her eyes, and spoke slowly but clearly. For many years, I believed a person's worth lay in titles and accolades, the very things society uses to measure success. I once stood at the pinnacle of academia and later lived like an invisible shadow. But through all of those experiences, I learned that true talent does not depend on a fancy title or the glamorous image we so often admire. She paused and looked directly into the eyes of the students in the front rows, whose faces were rapt with attention and deep respect. Real value, the true talent within each of us, is revealed by how we face challenges, the choices we make in our darkest hours, and most importantly, by our humility to recognize and honor the worth of those around us. Hannah then turned her gaze to Professor Andrew Harris, who sat quietly, his face thoughtful, as if wrestling with his own questions. She pressed on, her voice firm with resolve. When I worked in the campus cafeteria, I believed I was invisible. The truth is, I chose invisibility because I feared the world would judge me by what I no longer possessed. I wonder, how many people out there live the same way? How many hide their talents because they're afraid of being judged, afraid they won't measure up? She let that question hang in the air, letting it sink deeply into every heart in the auditorium. Faces everywhere softened with introspection, as though roused from a long slumber of indifference. Her voice rose again, gentle yet stronger. I'm not standing here today to ask you to honor me or bestow another title. I stand here to ask you to look wider, deeper, and more compassionately at the people around you each day. Listen to the quiet voices. Pay attention to those we often deem invisible, because it's quite possible they hold the most precious gifts we've overlooked. Tears glistened on many cheeks as her words washed over them. Some bowed their heads in shame, realizing they had once, perhaps even unconsciously, undervalued others because of outward appearances, social status, or fleeting achievements. Even Andrew Harris sat unmoving. His normally proud countenance softened, as if a wall of arrogance had finally been brought down. Hannah looked out over the crowd one last time and posed her final question, her voice ringing out with conviction. How many other Hannah Mitchells are out there being forgotten? How many carry stories worthy of honor but are dismissed, undervalued, and overlooked simply because we lack the humility to see their true worth? A profound silence followed, a silence charged with emotion and self-reflection. With a gentle nod, Hannah lowered her head in farewell and stepped down from the podium, leaving behind an auditorium hushed yet profoundly moved. Then, from the front row, Andrew Harris rose to his feet. His eyes brimmed with genuine emotion as he walked onto the stage toward Hannah. His voice trembled but rang with sincerity. I want everyone here to know that I am the first to admit I must change. I was too proud, too focused on outward glory, and lost sight of the true worth in every person. Hannah, you helped me see that. I am deeply sorry, and I thank you from my heart. At his heartfelt confession, the auditorium erupted in the most heartfelt, sustained applause the university had ever heard. Not out of politeness, but from genuine gratitude and shared understanding. Hannah smiled warmly and placed a hand over her heart in thanks. In that moment, everyone realized that the profound power of humility lies not just in words or actions, but in its ability to transform the hearts and minds of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people. As she walked out of the auditorium, Hannah felt her heart lighter and more at peace than ever before. She knew her mission did not end there. She would carry her story further, not for personal praise, but to remind the world that wherever we go there may be another invisible Hannah Mitchell waiting to be seen, heard, and honored, if only we have the humility and the willingness to open our hearts to their true worth. A few days after that memorable morning, it seemed a quiet yet powerful wave of change had reached every corner of Beacon University, especially the dining hall. That very place where Hannah Mitchell had spent her most invisible years had become a living monument to humility, courage, and forgotten talent. The once sterile white walls of the dining hall were now adorned with evocative photographs. Most prominent was a shot of Hannah standing among students and faculty, not in an academic gown, but wearing the simple uniform she'd once worn as an anonymous cafeteria worker. Beneath the photo, in large, dignified lettering, read, "True worth lies not in titles or appearances, but in heart and humility. Hannah Mitchell." The dining hall instantly became more than just a place to eat. It was a space where students came seeking inspiration and reflection. Hannah's story had become a vivid lesson for the entire Beacon community, that real talent can emerge anywhere, even in the overlooked corners we once passed by without a second glance. Meanwhile, President Robert Winston and the university leadership made an important decision. They invited Hannah to join the mathematics department as a visiting professor. Even more surprising, Hannah accepted, on one condition. She would continue to wear her cafeteria uniform whenever she taught. Some found it unexpected, but all felt profound respect for her humility and loyalty to her roots. On the day Hannah officially returned to the lectern, the lecture hall was packed with students, faculty, and staff. Everyone wanted to witness the moment the former cafeteria server, now a living symbol of the university, stepped forward. The moment Hannah entered, still in her simple uniform, a wave of applause erupted. When the clapping finally subsided, Hannah spoke in a calm yet warm voice. "I choose to keep this uniform, not to stand out or attract attention, but because it represents the most important part of who I am, the place where I learned the true value of humility, perseverance, and love." She paused, looking around the room. We often assume people in uniforms like this have nothing special to offer. But today, I hope that every time you see me standing here, you remember that anyone you meet might be hiding extraordinary talent. All it takes is the humility to listen and the sincerity to recognize the value within them. Her heartfelt words echoed through the hall, stirring profound awareness in every heart. Even Andrew Harris, once notorious for his arrogance, stood and addressed the students. I was wrong to think talent only appears in one form. Hannah has taught me, and I believe all of us, the greatest lesson. Never underestimate anyone or any role, because every person can hold extraordinary value. He looked at Hannah with genuine respect, and the hall burst into heartfelt applause, not polite or perfunctory, but deeply sincere. Hannah smiled gently and placed her hand over her heart in gratitude. In that moment, everyone realized that the power of humility lay not only in one person's words or deeds, but in its ability to transform the perceptions and hearts of many. Each morning thereafter, Hannah still began her day in the dining hall, not to serve as before, but to meet, converse with, and truly listen to the stories her former co-workers shared. She believed that closeness, humility, and genuine listening were the best ways to spread the profound values she had discovered on her long journey. At day's end, as she passed the photographs and quotations from her own life on the dining hall walls, Hannah always smiled quietly, feeling more at peace than ever. She knew that the transformation at Beacon was only the beginning of a much longer journey, a journey to help the world realize that humility and listening are the keys to uncovering and honoring the true worth hidden within each person. The soft golden rays of late afternoon sunlight draped the Beacon campus in warmth and tranquility. After her final lecture of the day, Hannah strolled out of the classroom, still wearing her simple cafeteria uniform, a living symbol of her roots and humility. As she stepped into the hallway, her gaze fell on a young woman fidgeting nervously. Petite, with curly black hair pulled back, the student looked both shy and eager. Hannah smiled gently and approached her. "Were you waiting for me? How can I help?" she asked. The young woman looked up, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Yes, I'm Jasmine Turner, a freshman in mathematics. Professor Hannah, I admire you so much. I came because I need your advice. I've been struggling with a new mathematical theory I've been developing, but I always feel I'm not good enough or brave enough to pursue it." Hannah placed a reassuring hand on Jasmine's shoulder, meeting her gaze with genuine warmth. "Jasmine, remember, what makes you remarkable isn't what others say about you, it's what you believe about yourself. I know that feeling well, because I was once in your shoes, convinced I lacked the ability and terrified to face my own talent." Tears glistened in Jasmine's eyes. "Do you really think I can do it? I've thought so many times that I should just give up, that my idea isn't strong enough." Hannah gently took Jasmine's notebook, flipping through a few pages. Her eyes lit up at the tentative yet uniquely promising equations. "You'll never know the true value of your idea unless you're brave enough to test it," she said firmly. "I once made the same mistake, believing failure was shameful, but I learned that every failure is an opportunity to become braver, wiser, and truly grow." She handed the notebook back to Jasmine, her eyes full of encouragement. "Keep writing, Jasmine. Write your own story with all the passion and courage in your heart. Don't let anyone else define your limits. Only you know what you're truly capable of." Jasmine was speechless, moved by Hannah's sincerity. Tears of gratitude and renewed belief rolled down her cheeks. "I won't give up," she declared with newfound resolve. "I will continue my research, and someday I hope to stand where you are and inspire others." Hannah beamed, her smile as comforting as the golden light around them. She knew Jasmine had rediscovered her inner strength and courage. In the days that followed, Jasmine often visited Hannah's office to discuss her theory. Their conversations went beyond equations and concepts. They were lessons in humility, courage, and genuine listening. Hannah and Jasmine's story became a living testament at Beacon to how sincerity and humility can transform lives. The whole university watched Jasmine's growth, from a doubtful freshman to a confident, passionate scholar. A year later, Jasmine was honored as the first recipient of the Hannah Mitchell Fellowship. Standing at the podium to accept her award, she spoke with heartfelt emotion. "Thanks to Professor Hannah, I found myself again. She taught me that each of us can achieve extraordinary things, as long as we're humble enough to listen, brave enough to act, and honest enough to believe in ourselves." Hannah sat in the audience, smiling softly at Jasmine's sincere words. In that moment, her heart swelled with true happiness, not from titles or prestigious awards, but from the real change she'd helped spark in young lives like Jasmine's. The ceremony ended in thunderous applause, filled with love and admiration. As Hannah left the hall and looked up at the clear blue sky, she felt light and hopeful. She knew that, despite the challenges she'd faced, she had lived by her deepest values: humility, perseverance, and the art of listening. And the story of Hannah Mitchell, the woman who went from invisible cafeteria worker to a symbol of humility and hidden talent, would forever live in the hearts of those she'd touched. A hopeful reminder that anyone, no matter where they start, can write an extraordinary story if they hold fast to humility, courage, and belief in their own true worth. If you found today's story meaningful and inspiring, please hit like, share it to spread this positive message, and subscribe to our channel to join us for more tales like this. Thank you for watching and supporting us.